No, you don't need the.
I'm doing this my way.
He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend, he a legend, he a legend. He a legend. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of Item. Welcome to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league, to the league of Item.
Pike on money, pike on money, pike on money. We making pike on money. Payday, about to throw a rack on China. Need some DFS advice, where can I find some? League of Items got the sheet with all the lineups and all the stacks that you need to get to diamond. League of Items!
Getting gold, that's the goal. Keep on winning on a roll. Kill 4 dragons, got soul. Now you got nowhere to go. Teleporting top to bot. Dive your carry on the spot. That's an ace. Wreck your base. Wear my crown. We on top.
What's up, everybody? It's Pikel with League of Items, and I've been MIA since last time I made a video. I bought a 2-family house, but yeah, been really busy with work, playing a lot of golf, had a huge injury to my back, but everything is going a lot better now. I'm ready to get into Worlds 2022, which is taking place here in the United States. There's some matches that are going to happen in Mexico, some right by me in Madison Square Garden, and then a couple other spots around the United States. So the reason I wanted to make a video before everything got started is because last year I had a lot of success kind of finding different spots compared to a lot of other people who make content. The one person who I've seen a lot of feedback, who got a lot of feedback for their video this year, was Caedrel. I think Caedrel is a pretty reasonable guy. Seems like he knows what he's talking about for the most part. He does make a lot of hot takes, and obviously he's very knowledgeable about the game. But I think that it kind of demonstrates just the difference between like an ex-professional and somebody who only looks at things from like a betting perspective. And so what we're going to do in this video, before we start looking at Worlds 2022, we're going to look at Worlds 2021. So here is Caedrel's tier list going into Worlds 2021. And it was a little bit different than a lot of other people that was out there. So he had Damwon, EDG, and FPX. Damwon and EDG both made it into the finals. So that was a good call. He also had T1 that made the semifinals in the S tier and Gen G in the A tier. But there are some other things that he said, like FPX was one of the top teams there. That was a pretty common opinion. Mad Lions was an S tier team, better than Gen G. That's the kind of stuff that always makes me laugh. Is like, obviously he's from Europe, and you know, maybe he has some LEC bias. It's unavoidable really for a lot of people because everybody has their own biases. And then he had RNG. My tier list from last year was there were some similarities. I had all 4 of the semifinalists and finalists in the top 2 tiers: Damwon, Gen G, EDG, and T1. I was much higher on Korean teams than the public in general. Obviously, he had most of them up there as well. I had a high opinion of LNG, RNG, and FPX as well, but obviously they didn't really play as well as a lot of people expected. The reason I wanted to kind of highlight that is because there are a lot of different opinions that are out there. So when you see my list compared to his list, depending on what happens at Worlds 2022, some things that I say are going to look right and be right. Some things I'm going to say are going to look wrong and are wrong. That's kind of unavoidable. But I just wanted to get that out of the way first because it's not like I'm coming out of left field with like some kind of insane criticism about Caedrel. But I do have some disagreements this year, I think, and what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the players first. So before we start talking about the individual teams, we're going to talk about the quote-unquote best players in the world. So recently, Caedrel made a video about the top 5 players in each role for Worlds. First of all, I think that it's a fun exercise, and I understand why he did it. It's great content. He's a content creator. That's kind of what he does. That's one of the things that he does. I personally don't think that it's as valuable to talk about 5 players from each role. I think that it should really be about the elite players at each role, and there are only 9 players that I really am kind of looking at as the best players at Worlds 2022. And there is at least 1 player from each role, but it's important to have at least player from each role if there is a difference maker, and I think that there is one at each position at Worlds this year. There are going to be a lot of names that are not on my list that you can say, oh, well, this player has been on a better team for so many more years. That isn't what I'm taking into consideration. Primarily what I'm looking at is the which players do I think create such a huge strain on the draft and have insane mechanical ability that can completely warp a series or can cause this player to carry through the entire tournament. And that's kind of what I've tried to do here. So let's start in the top lane. And I know that a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but I think that Breathe is the best top laner in the world. Another top laner that isn't at Worlds that I have a ton of respect for is Kana. Kana had a really tough season this entire year, but that's kind of an important distinction to make because his team wasn't very good. It's not a problem with Kana, it's a problem with his team. And you might say, oh, well, you know, Kana didn't look good in a lot of the games either. It's really difficult to distinguish a bad performance from a bad team just because it's like a bad situation to play from, and the players need to kind of put themselves into risky positions if they're on lesser teams, because that's how you can try to create a winning difference. But, you know, they talk about 369, Zeus, Wayward, Doran, Nuggery. A lot of these top laners are very good, but there's a difference between being very good and the best in the world. I think that it's funny that a lot of players have put 369 as their either best top laner in the world right now or one of the best. I was kind of arguing for 369 to not be considered a garbage top laner. Everyone was flaming him for the past year about being one of the reasons why top esports wasn't good last year, and now goes to JDG, is playing with Kanavi, and now all of a sudden he's a great top laner. I don't think that it really makes a lot of sense to have a quote-unquote great top laner next to a great jungler who kind of was talked about poorly for the last year and a half. So that shows how wildly some people's opinions swing on these players. I am not going to fall into that trap with 369. I didn't go from having him as one of the best top laners in the world to a garbage top laner, and now I'm saying he's the best in the world again. My opinion of him has stayed roughly the same. And that's kind of the difference between myself and a lot of other people who make these kinds of videos, is that they are more prone to wildly change their opinion based on what has happened recently. And I know a lot of people watching this video may want me to react more wildly, but that's not how you find edges over the betting market unless you're early on something. So that's the best top laner I think in the world right now. I have Breathe as the best top laner in the world. If I could build around a top laner, it would be Breathe. In the jungle, I think that there are only 2 junglers at Worlds who are truly elite. And this is probably a little bit more controversial because there are a lot of good junglers, especially at a competition like Worlds. One of the most important positions in League of Legends is jungle. I would say it's the most important position in League of Legends, and when I'm rating teams, almost all of my focus goes to the jungle. And I think that there are some surprising inclusions on these lists. So Tian has had a good season. Tian is a former world champion. Tian is not one of the best junglers at this competition. He checks a lot of the boxes for long-term talent, but he was not the focal point of his team when they won the world championship. He had good performances, but he wasn't the guy. And you can't be the second or third best player on your team and be considered one of the best players in the world, in my mind, because, how do you justify having Tian on this list and not the other players on his team if we're just talking about elite players. And on Caedrel'S list, for example, Tion Knight and Jackie Love are all there. Like, I just don't know what that even means. Like, it just doesn't really make sense to me. It's too many players from one team. If you start taking these players away from these environments, are they able to perform at that same level? And I would say probably not. It's not going to be as consistent. So it's always important in my mind to kind of pinpoint the player who has had the most impact on their team and allows them to play in a style that causes them to be such a winning team. So my two junglers that I think are the best at Worlds, and this has a lot to do with their ability to carry games and be the focal point of their team, are Kanavi and Canyon. And I think that a lot of people last year would not have said that Kanavi is one of the best junglers in the world, but for the past 2 years, Kanavi has been one of the best junglers in the world, if not the best jungler in the world. That's been my opinion consistently, because that type of thing shouldn't change. In international football/soccer, you have the concept of form is temporary, class is permanent. I'm looking at this from a class perspective. I think that Breathe is a classy player. I think that Kanavi and Canyon are both classy players. They're all, for the most part, meta resistant. Kanavi had some trouble last year with the meta, but I think a lot of that had to do with their team's inability to draft around it the right way, because there is always more than one way to play League of Legends. A lot of professional teams kind of just follow the hive mind and will do what everyone else is doing. It's a mistake. It's a problem. But, we can't really separate the players from those teams, because every player has to be on a team, and there's a lot of poor coaching out there, which is just unfortunate, but it's the reality of the situation. Some players that they included that I definitely wouldn't: Jai, definitely not, and Wei, definitely not. Wei has been a liability for RNG for most of the year. I've never had a high opinion of Wei. I think that Breathe is a much more important player on RNG. I think that Xiaohu is more important and better than Wei relative to their position. And even Gala, who is someone who I'm notoriously low on. All of those players are more important and better than Wei. So that's that. Let's go to the mid lane. And the mid lane, I have 3 players, and this is the deepest position at Worlds, and there are a lot of very good mid laners at Worlds. The 3 best mid laners in the world have been the same for multiple years. Faker was included in this list, but I think that now you can kind of take him off of the list. He's still the best player of all time. But right now, Chovy, Knight, and Showmaker are the 3 best mid laners in the world. Yagao is not one of the best mid laners in the world. I can't believe that he's on both of these lists, because Yagao, when Top Esports was really good in 2020, people wanted to give him a lot of credit, and they wanted to give their AD carry a lot of credit. Well, guess what? The AD carry is gone because he's just not that good, and Yagao fills a role within the team, but he is not the focal point of the team. Hope is much more important than Yagao. Hope and Kanavi are generally the carry players on this team, and they are the 2 most important players on this team. Knight, everybody knows Knight is one of the best mid laners in the world. When his team struggles, a lot of it has to do with the team's inability to draft around him, or them not using the meta the right way to kind of support Knight in his ability to hard carry games. In 2020, when he was really at his, I don't know if I'd say peak, but when he was kind of more dominant, he had a lot of true hard carry performances on late game scaling mid laners. Like, you would see the crazy Cassidy games and stuff like that. I think that meta really allowed him to shine in a different way. If we are in this kind of Silas, Azir, Orianna, we've seen a lot of these champions pretty consistently throughout playoffs for a lot of these teams. It's really not going to be as impactful. I think that jungle will probably be the most important role at Worlds, as it normally is, because the champion diversity in jungle will hopefully be very good. And when players like Kanavi are the focal points of a lot of these teams, and kind of helping shape the meta that we're going to see at Worlds, it'll be a very diverse champion pool because he has so many things he can do, which is going to force other players and teams to prepare a wide variety of champions in multiple roles to deal with players like Kanavi and Canyon. Peanut is borderline for the junglers, but we went past that. Just touching back on it again, Peanut is a little bit less aggressive than Kanavi and Canyon in terms of bloodiness in my mind, and I think that Peanut just benefits greatly from being on a better team. Peanut is a player where I had him in the second tier, borderline for top tier of junglers for the past 2 years, but depending on which team he's on and how good that team is performing, impacted everyone else's opinion so much more wildly. So people weren't considering Peanut very good a year or two ago, and now they think he's the best jungler in the world. That kind of thing just doesn't make as much sense to me. But let's do a quick recap for the first 3 positions. So we have Breathe, and then in the jungle we have Kanavi and Canyon, and in the mid lane we have Chovy, Knight, and Showmaker. Showmaker has not been fantastic this year, but Showmaker's talent level is kind of just insane. And he is, I think, undoubtedly one of the 3 most important mid laners and best mid laners at Worlds this year. I think that a return to form would allow Damwon to go super deep in this tournament. And, you might not agree with that, but we'll get into it when we're talking about the teams again. The betting, the sports books agree with me, I think. Then in the AD carry position, there are only 2 elite AD carries in the world right now. There are some interesting AD carries who are better at one kind of league or the other. Like, you have players like Jackie Love, who is very aggressive. You have players like Gala, who benefits greatly from being on a good team, and they kind of force feed him kills. You have players like Hope, who are the beneficiary of having a great team around them. And then you have someone who's like the 2 former T1 AD carries, Berserker, and the current T1 AD carry, Gumayusi. They're both good AD carries, if not very good AD carries. But even during this year, people's opinions on Gumayusi has kind of fluctuated wildly because of how games have kind of played out and the style that T1 is playing. But really, Viper and Ruler, by far the 2 best AD carries in the world, and that was my complete justification for having them as my top 2 last year and including both of those teams in the S tier. They are just insane difference makers. It will depend on what kind of meta we have. If it's more of a hard carry meta, this talent differential will be felt even more wildly. If it's a utility carry 80 meta, players like Hope, Gala, Berserker, Gumayusi, Jackie Love will all be able to kind of bridge that gap a little bit more easy because of the types of champions that are being played. And then last but not least, in the support role, these guys seem to think that Missing or Lehens are better than Keria. That's kind of insane. I know, it depends on what you're watching League of Legends for, I guess, but I think most people that care more about the plays that are being made than the KDA would agree that Keria is probably the best support in the world and potentially the best player in the world. It's just the style of League of Legends that Keria plays doesn't translate well into statistics. But if we get into a position where it's a utility AD carry meta, Keria is going to be able to shine in a much more real way because it's not going to be about protecting your AD carry and letting them get to the late game, so you have to play very conservatively in the bot lane. If it's like utility AD carries, Keria will be able to be super aggressive and potentially carry in different roles, in different games as well, in different drafts. So, like I said, I think that the best players at Worlds, the 9 best players are Breathe, Kanavi, Canyon, Chovy, Knight, Showmaker, Viper, Ruler, and Keria. Some players that I wanted to talk about that are kind of more off the beaten path than what the players that Caedrel talked about on his channel are players like Piosik. Piosik is one of the best junglers in the world. I don't think that he's as good as Kanavi or Canyon, but Piosik is the best player on DRX. They brought in Juhan, I think, because Piosik may need to have military service next year. I don't like the way that DRX drafts. I don't like how they use Juhan as a sub. And and like splits time with Piosik. But I think talent-wise, Piosik is one of the best in the world. We saw that when they were at Worlds last time. Zika is one of the best mid laners in the world. A lot of people probably aren't talking about him because they're not as familiar with Zika. Zika isn't a quote-unquote household name yet, but I think that if DRX is able to make a run during this tournament, these are the two players that are going to kind of jump up to the top of people's lists going into next year. Then we have 3 players from North America who they are, like, for different reasons, just incredibly important players. One player who's not on this list, who would be if he was actually playing at Worlds, is Danny. Danny's nuts, but Danny is going through some things supposedly right now that is going to force him to not play in Worlds. That's very unfortunate. Danny is a great player, a great young player. I really hope that he is able to kind of figure out a way to deal with his emotions and mental state and the pressure that he's obviously feeling so that he can compete in this environment in the future because he really is one of the best players in North America, if not the best player in North America. And it's unfortunate that this has all kind of happened. But with him not being there, I think that there are 4 clear players who have a chance to kind of prove themselves as being potentially world-class players, and those players are Blabber, Berserker, Inspired, and Jojo Pyun. So Jojo Pyun wants to be that guy, and so far he's kind of looked like that guy. He wants to be going toe-to-toe with players like Chovy, Knight, Faker, Showmaker. He's supposedly not afraid of them. He didn't have a great MSI, but I think he performed better at MSI than a lot of people thought he would. It'll be funny to see how Kaori kind of blends in with the team, because I think that his champion pool may be better for Evil Geniuses at this tournament than Danny, but Danny gave them a different ceiling in terms of AD carry play. So I don't expect Evil Geniuses to do much at Worlds, but if they do, it'll be because of Jojo Pyun, and it will be because of Inspired. Inspired is one of the best junglers. He is the best jungler in the West. He's better than everybody in Europe. He's better than everybody in North America. He is clearly the best jungler, the most influential jungler out of any of those teams. I'm sure that you'll disagree with me on that one. That's totally fine. He is not only very talented, he's also very intelligent, and he is driven to a different level. This guy is a maniac. I love the fact that he will yell at his teammates. I hope that didn't have anything to do with Danny feeling way too much pressure. So if that is the case, then I might have to retract some of this. But Inspired's desire to win and his intensity are 2 of the things that I love the most about him. I love his attitude. I love how he's like screaming during fights while also keeping his team like on task. I think that he's been a tremendous benefit to the team in terms of Jojo and Danny being able to kind of focus on themselves during the game and then have Inspired come and try to push everybody past the finish line. Just truly a great player. If C9 is very good at Worlds, it'd be easy to say, oh, it's because, Fudge is so good, or Jensen, is carrying the team coming back. In reality, it's going to be because of Blabber and Berserker, but for different reasons. In order for C9 to kind of get through the early and mid games, it's going to come down to Blabber being able to stay on pace with these other junglers at this competition, which will be very difficult depending on draft, because you have players like Peanut, Tian, Kanavi, Canyon. All of these players are, just as good, if not better than Blabber. Most of them are better than Blabber. But I think that Blabber plays the same style of League of Legends. So if you get a matchup, for example, of Peanut versus Blabber, if the draft goes Blabber's way and he's able to exert a lot of pressure in the early game, C9 could take a game off of Gen.G. It's unlikely. It's like they probably have a 15 to 20% chance to beat Gen.G in a specific game before draft is taken into consideration and side and everything like that, just from a talent perspective. But I think it is possible, and that's kind of how they have to do it. What's going to happen is during the early and mid game, Blabber tries to keep everything under control. Jensen hopefully locks down the mid lane and reduces the variance, and then Berserker's mechanical ability will be on display in the late game. And that's really the line that we've kind of been fed about Berserker coming over from T1. Gumayusi saying that he thought Berserker was very good and he was somewhat afraid of him taking his spot on T1. If Berserker is that good, then he will have a very good showing at Worlds. It'll be difficult, and obviously his career's not over if he has a bad Worlds, but that's kind of the upside that we're potentially looking at. I've been doing global rankings all... Oh, I should not have gotten rid of that. Let's see. Whoops. I need to get Caedrel'S tier list back. Because then we'll go through that and then... Oh, it's an advertisement. So basically what I was going to say is I've been making tier lists all year. This one is from January, and a lot of the teams that I was high on before the season started are, you know, performing at a high level. So in the S tier, I had Damwon and Genji. Both of those teams made Worlds, which most people would have had them at the top of their list as well, or at least in the Worlds making tier. Then we had T1, Top Esports, RNG, EDG. All of those teams made Worlds. LNG and Weibo Gaming did not. Evil Geniuses made Worlds. DRX, Vitality did not. JDG did. Those are the kinds of teams that I was looking at before the season started. So we had all four of the qualifiers from the LPL in our list, which is a good thing. So this is Caedrel'S tier list. And what I wanted to do here, the reason why I wanted to do this is because there's an implied tier list from the betting markets because of how they're evaluating teams. So before we talk about that, let's just take a look at the teams that are included on Caedrel'S list. So if you're thinking of Caedrel as, you know, some kind of insightful League of Legends analyst who has unique opinions and, you know, you can trust as a source of information, you might want to ask yourself, where else can I get similar levels of insight and kind of, you know, bounce my ideas off of some kind of like external source so that I know what my opinions look like relative to the market? Go look at a sports book, because the sports books are going to surprise you, and that's how you can kind of find an edge. So on Caedrel'S list, he has JDG, Top Esports, and Genji. The betting market, they agree with him. They have a different order, but they agree in general that those are the three best teams at Worlds. Then he has RNG, EDG, and T1. Again, the sportsbook agrees, and they do agree that there's a slight tier, like a bump between those two teams. The betting markets think that Genji, JDG, and Top Esports are all around 30%. Like, they'll win 30% of the time. At least that's what the odds imply. This number's going to go over 100%, by the way, just because that's how sportsbooks make their money. They think that T1, EDG, and RNG all have about a 10 to 12% chance of winning the tournament. Then we have Damwon Gaming at 7%, DRX at 3%, and then everybody else basically on Caedrel'S list is 1%. So Caedrel clearly has a bias towards G2. They believe that G2 is able to win at a higher percentage than what the sportsbook does. The sportsbook thinks that Rogue, G2, Cloud9, and Fnatic are all equals, but they think that all of those teams are worse than DRX. So if you think that G2 is able to win Worlds and you bet $100, you would win $6,600. It's a very unlikely thing to happen. That's my number from like a couple weeks ago. That might not reflect the market today, but the difference is that when these numbers are released, that is the starting point for what the sportsbook is willing to lose. Then as more money comes in on G2 because they're a popular team, that number will come down. So it doesn't mean the sportsbook thought that they were very bad, but now they think they're better because, you know, people have been talking about G2 having a chance to win Worlds. That's not how sportsbooks kind of do their thing. Really what they're trying to do is balance their book so that now the more money that comes in on G2, there's less risk because it'll be at a lower number, lower percent chance of happening. Or higher. The reason they reduce their money is because now they're saying if it does happen, we're kind of going to lose more and more money. So those two numbers balance out. This is what the tier list would look like if you just took the tier list from the sportsbook and threw it into the different tiers. With that being said, I think that there are a lot of teams who you basically just can't bet on. I just don't think there's enough value there. I think that Gen G, JDG, and Top Esports, if any three of those teams win, you're not going to want to bet on them because it's like 100 to win. It's 225 to win 100, or 100 to win 225, 250, or 275. That's really not good enough, and you're going to get odds close to that potentially on whoever is in the finals against one of these types of teams. You're probably better off just holding on to your money because of the time value of money and betting later on. Then you have T1, EDG, and RNG. I don't think any three of those teams are really worth betting either if you're betting multiple teams. If you like one of those teams a lot, then you can consider betting on T1, EDG, or RNG. But personally, I would not. I think that the numbers that the sportsbook are offering this year is kind of like just really inflated because that's who they're anticipating the money coming in on. I think you're better off putting money on teams like Dom1 Gaming or DRX. I think that they have a ton of talent and can compete with the top teams. And we've seen that. Like, Gen G has obviously had a great year, but once you get into the Worlds environment, depending on what shakes out with the meta, it'll just be totally different. I think that both of those teams definitely have enough talent. Then we have Rogue, G2, C9, Fnatic, 100 Thieves, Mad Lions, EG, and then I think Beyond Gaming and Saigon Buffalo might be worth putting money on. So instead of putting like $100 on Gen G and $100 on EDG and $100 on RNG, I would more likely put 100 on Dom1, 100 on DRX, 50 on Rogue, 50 on G2, 50 on Cloud9, and then 20 on Fnatic, 100 Thieves, Mad Lions, EG, Beyond Gaming, and Saigon Buffalo. The reason I would do that is because that is equal to $470, but the return on all of those bets would be more than the amount that I'm risking. If you bet 100 on Gen G, JDG, and Top Esports, then you're betting 300. You're not going to get $300 back. It's going to be a super low return. It's just not worth it. You'd get 225. You'd get 325 back, 350 back, 375 back, but you're not going to bet that amount of money for like a $25, $50 return. I mean, you can if you want to, but I like kind of swinging for the fences. So, like I said, basically, most people's tier lists, if they're just taking it from a sports book, it's going to look pretty similar. The stands that Caedrel is making here is that G2, Rogue, and Cloud9 are all better than DRX. That's really the only thing that he's saying that's out of line with the sports book. This year, it does feel very top-heavy at Worlds, but since it's in North America, I think that North American teams and European teams will have an unbelievable amount of support from the people who end up going to, Madison Square Garden or wherever it is in like Chicago or Los Angeles. Or no, I think Georgia is one of the sites. But I do think that could actually have an impact because we kind of saw that when it was in Europe. So that's why I'm kind of taking a look at the other teams that are there. And then with Beyond Gaming and Saigon Buffalo, I think that both of them have a couple of players who are good enough to make an impact at Worlds, but it's very unlikely that they end up winning, which is why they're basically at plus 50,000. So if you bet $20 on Beyond Gaming or Saigon Buffalo and they win Worlds, you get $20, and then you also have the opportunity to hedge out in the future. If I was only allowed to pick one team to win Worlds and had to root for them the entire tournament and still feel like it's a live bet, I would say that it's probably gonna be RNG. I would say RNG and Dom1 are the two teams that I would actually no, I don't want RNG to win. I hate Gala. I hate when Gala gets talked up. That's basically it. I mean, like I said, a lot of people's tier lists are going to look the same. I don't think that like Evil Geniuses has a chance anymore because they don't have Danny, which is kind of unfortunate. I think that DRX is going to surprise people with how good they are. I don't like a lot of the teams from Europe. I think this is one of the worst European groups that we've seen at a World Championship. I think that the LCS will be more successful at this Worlds than the LEC, which might look insane when we look at this video a month from now or 2 months from now. But I mean, like, G2 is so overhyped, Fnatic is so overhyped. Rogue, people are kind of sleeping on Rogue, but I'm not sure how much they can really do against these top Western teams, and Mad Lions is just bad. So that's basically it. You know, I don't want to have an hour video this time. I might put a little more thought into the tier list and see what else I would change. But that's basically it for now. Got to get back into the swing of things, making videos for Worlds. But that's all I've got for you today. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you later.